122 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 degrees Celsius, no refrigerators, no freezers, and yet in the middle of one of the hottest deserts on Earth, the Egyptians had ice. How? Did they uncover a secret chamber in the pyramids filled with frozen water? Were pharaohs buried with an endless supply of ice to take to the afterlife, or imported from distant mountains? Here are 15 ways the ancient Egyptians got ice in the brutal Sahara heat. Harvesting ice from distant mountains. Egypt is located in the largest hot desert in the world, Sahara Desert, which spans 3.6 million square miles across North Africa. Not to be confused with the biggest desert in the world, the Antarctic Desert, covering about 5.5 million square miles. The desert provided little reprieve from its relentless heat, and while the Nile provided an essential lifeline, there were no snow-capped peaks within the kingdom's borders. Yet historical accounts from other civilizations suggest that ice was sometimes obtained through long-distance trade, reserved as a luxury for the highest elite. Could the Egyptians have done the same? While Egypt itself had no natural glaciers, its trade routes stretched far and wide, connecting it to the Mediterranean, the Levant, and even regions beyond Mesopotamia. Ancient records show that civilizations such as the Romans, Greeks, and Persians transported ice from distant mountains to their cities. The Egyptians, known for their wealth and influence, also did the same by importing ice from regions like the Taurus Mountains in Anatolia, the mountains of Lebanon, or even the highlands of Ethiopia. After the ice was harvested from the peaks during colder months, they were then packed in insulating materials such as straw, reeds, or sawdust, and transported via caravans of donkeys or boats along the Nile. In some cases, specially designed clay or alabaster containers were used to minimize melting. This journey was not simple. Ice at that time was a highly perishable good, requiring swift transportation to prevent loss. Only the wealthiest nobles, pharaohs, and temple officials were able to afford such an extravagant import. For Egyptian royalty, displaying power meant controlling the uncontrollable. The ability to have ice delivered from distant lands reinforced the pharaoh's divine authority, an unmatched luxury in a land ruled by the sun. At grand feasts, ice could be used to chill wine or preserve exotic foods, impressing foreign dignitaries and reinforcing the kingdom's dominance. Temple priests, responsible for maintaining ritual purity, sought cool water or ice for sacred offerings, particularly in temples devoted to Amun, Osiris, or Sekhmet, where cooling the god's statues symbolized purification and divine favor. The concept of long-distance ice transportation continued well into the classical and medieval periods, eventually influencing the modern ice trade of the 19th century. Wealthy elites in pre-industrial Europe and the Middle East imported ice in much the same way. Nighttime radiative cooling. The Egyptian desert was no doubt relentless. By day, the sun scorched the land, its golden rays reflecting off the limestone walls of temples and pyramids. But what a lot of people don't know is that at night, the heat vanished into the open sky, leaving behind a stark contrast, an eerie chill that blanketed the land. The ancient Egyptians, masters of adaptation, found a way to harness this natural cooling effect to create something precious: ice. This method, known as radiative cooling, was simple yet creative. Egyptian engineers took advantage of the desert's drastic temperature shifts. Large, shallow clay or alabaster trays were filled with water and placed on rooftops or in open courtyards. As the night air grew colder, the heat from the water radiated upward into the clear sky, allowing the surface to cool rapidly. To maximize this effect, the trays were positioned on raised platforms, often lined with straw or sand, to provide insulation from the residual ground heat. On particularly cold nights, a thin layer of ice would form on the surface of the water. Workers would carefully skim off the ice in the early hours of the morning before the sun could melt it, storing it in insulated containers or underground chambers for later use. In a land where daytime temperatures could soar past 122 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 degrees Celsius, ice was a rare and valuable commodity. It wasn't something the average farmer or labourer had access to. This was a luxury reserved for royalty, priests, and high-ranking officials. Ice was used to cool drinks in royal banquets, provide relief from illness, and even play a role in sacred rituals. Pharaohs, including Horemheb and Ramses II, were known for their lavish palace feasts, where cold beverages were seen as a sign of power and sophistication. The ability to create and store ice gave Egypt's elite a level of control over nature that reinforced their divine status. Reflective pool cooling. The Egyptian nights, though vastly cooler than the relentless daytime heat, once again provided an opportunity. The ancient Egyptians, already adept at using shallow trays for nighttime radiative cooling, developed an even more effective method using reflective pools to amplify this natural process. Pharaohs and high-ranking priests may have been aware of this phenomenon, instructing engineers and architects to design strategically placed water features in royal estates and temples. Some of these pools were specially designed for nighttime cooling, with darker surfaces to absorb heat during the day and maximize radiative cooling at night. The concept of reflective pool cooling relied on water's ability to radiate heat and reflect the night sky, maximizing the cooling effect. Large stone or clay-lined pools were constructed in open courtyards, temple complexes, and palace gardens. These pools served multiple purposes, not only as aesthetic and religious features, but also as potential cooling aids. At night, the still water acted as a mirror, reflecting the cold expanse of the night sky while simultaneously radiating heat upward, a process that cooled the water at the surface. On particularly chilly desert nights, a thin layer of ice formed on the water's surface, much like the shallow clay trays used in radiative cooling. This ice, once collected, could be stored underground or used immediately. Reflective pools were an efficient way to enhance existing cooling methods, particularly in temples and noble estates where controlled environments were crucial. Priests conducting nighttime rituals found cool, reflective pools to be sacred, aligning with their belief that water represented purity and divine renewal. If ice was harvested from these pools, it was used in ritual offerings to the gods, reinforcing the priest's status as gatekeepers of divine wisdom. In palaces and high-ranking estates, ice formed from these pools was skimmed in the morning and transported to underground storage, extending its availability beyond a single night. This process provided cool water for noble families, added luxury to royal feasts, and even served as medicinal purposes. Solar reflectors to enhance cooling. While the Egyptians primarily sought relief from the scorching desert heat, they also understood how light and reflection could influence temperature control. Their mastery of stone carving, polished surfaces, and reflective materials proves how they experimented with solar reflectors to reduce heat absorption and enhance cooling techniques. Although no direct evidence exists of large-scale solar reflectors in ancient Egypt, their understanding of reflective surfaces is well documented. Many Egyptian temples and pyramids were constructed with limestone, a material known for its high reflectivity, which deflected sunlight and kept interiors cooler. Egyptians also had access to polished copper, gold, and silver, which they used extensively in jewelry, mirrors, and ritual objects. These polished metal surfaces were strategically placed in royal or temple settings to redirect sunlight away from important buildings, reducing heat buildup. In the case of ice making and preservation, solar reflectors played a role in two key ways. It protects the ice storage areas by reducing heat absorption in underground ice chambers. By deflecting sunlight away from entry points, they slowed the melting process. It also enhanced nighttime cooling by amplifying the ability of the water to release heat and form ice overnight. Today, the concept of solar reflectors for cooling is used in architecture, spacecraft, and sustainable energy solutions. White roofs, reflective insulation, and modern cooling systems rely on the same principles that ancient Egyptians may have experimented with thousands of years ago. Ice beneath the sands. The Egyptians had long been masters of underground construction, as seen in their tombs, granaries, and even hidden storage rooms beneath palaces and temples. For ice preservation, they adapted this knowledge to create subterranean storage pits. These chambers were often dug several feet below the surface, where the temperature remained significantly lower than above ground. To further enhance insulation, these storage areas were lined with materials such as clay, straw, and reeds, preventing heat from seeping in. Ice collected from nighttime radiative cooling or transported from other regions was carefully placed inside and covered with insulating materials like sawdust or linen wraps to reduce melting. Some chambers were built within the walls of temples and royal estates, ensuring that only the elite had access to this rare luxury. Egyptian labourers and builders used their expertise in constructing deep burial shafts and granaries to create similar structures specifically designed for cooling. Merchants from this time in particular employed similar techniques to preserve perishable goods like wine, oils, and medicinal herbs, ensuring that valuable items could be stored safely even in the extreme heat. Today, earth-sheltered homes and underground wine cellars use the same passive cooling techniques developed thousands of years ago. In some regions, farmers still dig underground storage pits to keep food and beverages cool without electricity. Use of thick walls and high ceilings. Egyptian architecture was not just about monumental beauty, it was also engineered for survival. In a land where temperatures regularly exceeded 122 degrees Fahrenheit, creating naturally cool indoor spaces was essential. One of their most effective passive cooling strategies was the use of thick stone walls and high ceilings, which played a key role in maintaining lower temperatures and preserving ice. Egyptian palaces, temples, and noble estates were often built with thick limestone or mud brick walls, which provided excellent insulation. These materials had a high thermal mass, meaning they could absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, preventing extreme temperature fluctuations inside. Additionally, buildings were designed with high ceilings and open courtyards, allowing hot air to rise and escape, while cooler air circulated below. Some elite homes and royal chambers may have had special ventilation shafts, ensuring that the interior remained significantly cooler than the blazing desert outside. For ice storage, these architectural techniques were invaluable. Underground chambers built within thick stone structures remained cool for longer periods, slowing down the melting process of ice stored from nighttime radiative cooling or imported sources. Furthermore, temple sanctuaries and palace storage areas were often positioned strategically, with northern-facing entrances that minimized exposure to direct sunlight. By designing storage rooms with minimal openings and thick insulating walls, Egyptians extended the usability of their ice and perishable goods. The concept of using thick, thermally resistant walls also played a role in marketplaces and storage facilities, where merchants sought to keep valuable goods safe from the heat. The Egyptian use of thick walls and high ceilings influenced architectural styles in North Africa, the Middle East, and Southern Europe, where similar methods are still used in traditional homes and buildings today. Modern sustainable architecture often incorporates passive cooling techniques, including thermal mass materials, high ceilings, and natural ventilation, all principles that Egyptians mastered thousands of years ago. Combination of wind catchers and water pools. The Egyptians, known for their architectural brilliance, understood that air and water, when used together, could create natural cooling systems. while wind catchers, malkaf, and water pools were effective on their own. Combining them into a single, integrated cooling system enhanced their ability to store ice and regulate indoor temperatures. This combined system allowed the Egyptian elite to maintain cool indoor spaces and preserve ice more efficiently. Palaces and noble estates enjoyed consistently chilled air, ensuring that royalty and high priests were always protected from the intense summer heat. In temples, priests may have relied on this technique to keep sacred offerings fresh. The ability to maintain cold water and perishable items would have reinforced their role as divine caretakers, responsible for ensuring the gods' blessings upon Egypt. Traders and merchants who handled imported ice used these cooling methods to extend storage times, making ice more accessible to those who could afford it. Wind catchers, tall structures with openings facing the prevailing winds, directed fresh air downward into palaces, temples, and noble estates. This created air circulation, reducing indoor temperatures while also pushing hot air out through designated vents. To amplify this cooling effect, some buildings likely incorporated shallow water pools beneath the airflow. When the moving air passed over the water, it picked up moisture and cooled even further, a process similar to modern evaporative cooling systems. This chilled air would then be dispersed through corridors and living spaces, creating a comfortable environment even in the desert heat. In locations where ice was available, placing wind catchers near pools containing thin layers of ice could have enhanced cooling. This would have been especially useful in elite homes, temple sanctuaries, and royal palaces, where maintaining a steady, comfortable temperature was essential. Additionally, subterranean storage areas may have benefited from this system. By directing cool air into underground chambers, ice could have been preserved longer, ensuring it remained available for rituals, medical treatments, or high-status consumption. The concept of combining airflow and water cooling has influenced Middle Eastern and North African architecture for centuries. Use of qanats for cooling. The Egyptian civilization, built along the lifeblood of the Nile, depended on innovative water management systems to sustain itself in an otherwise harsh desert environment. While much of their engineering focused on irrigation and flood control, there is speculation that they may have also learned from Persian qanat technology, an advanced system of subterranean water channels used to transport and cool water. Qanats were developed by the Persians around 1000 BCE and functioned as underground aqueducts that transported water over long distances. The system worked by digging a series of vertical shafts connected to a gently sloping underground tunnel, allowing water from natural springs or high-altitude sources to flow passively towards settlements. While Egypt did not have the mountainous terrain ideal for traditional qanats, evidence suggests that they used similar underground water tunnels in certain regions. Egyptian engineers, known for their expertise in hydraulics and stonework, may have adapted these techniques in temple complexes, palaces, and elite estates, where cooling water was essential. One potential use of qanat-style systems was in subterranean water reservoirs designed to keep water cool before use. These reservoirs, constructed beneath temples and royal structures, may have supplied cold water for purification rituals, ice preservation, and even cooling palace interiors through evaporative techniques. The Egyptians implemented qanat-like structures gave them a sustainable method for cooling and ice storage. The constant movement of underground water naturally absorbed heat from the surroundings, making it significantly cooler than surface water. High priests and temple caretakers used these systems to supply sacred pools with cold water, enhancing ritual purification practices. In royal estates, deep underground water channels provided a consistent source of cool water for elite baths and fountains, ensuring comfort for pharaohs and their inner circles even during the height of summer. The ability to transport cool water underground, away from the sun's direct heat, helped preserve ice and perishable goods. By channeling the water through wind catchers or shaded storage areas, it even acted as a primitive cooling system, similar to modern evaporative air conditioning. Quanat technology continues to be used in Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of North Africa, proving its efficiency in sustainable water management. Today, engineers study subterranean cooling methods to develop eco-friendly solutions for hot climates. Use of natural caves and caverns. Egypt is home to several natural cave systems, particularly near the Valley of the Kings, the Eastern Desert, and parts of the Sinai Peninsula. These naturally cool, shaded environments would have provided a practical way to store ice away from the sun's reach. When collected from radiative cooling pools or transported from distant sources, it was stored in deep caves lined with insulating materials. Egyptians used sawdust, reeds, or thick clay jars to further slow the melting process, ensuring that ice remained available for ritual, medicinal, or luxury use. Additionally, cave systems located near religious sites or royal estates were selected for exclusive ice storage, ensuring that only priests, nobles, or high-ranking officials had access. Temple complexes built near natural caves had an advantage in preserving cold water or ice, particularly for sacred rituals or medical applications. This helped them to extend ice availability well beyond the usual melting time. This would have had important social and religious implications, as ice was seen as a rare, valuable commodity. Particularly for healers, storing ice in caves or subterranean spaces ensured they could use cold therapy to treat heat exhaustion, reduce swelling, or preserve medicinal herbs for extended use. While not all Egyptians would have had access to ice stored in caves, it is likely that these locations were reserved for the most powerful and influential figures, reinforcing the idea that controlling ice was a symbol of status and authority. The use of natural caves for cooling inspired many later civilizations, leading to the development of underground ice storage houses in Persia, Greece, and China. Yakhchal. The ancient world was shaped by trade, conquest, and shared knowledge, with civilizations borrowing and refining techniques from one another. By 400 BCE, Persian engineers had mastered a remarkable method for ice storage, the yakhchal, an early form of refrigeration that allowed ice to be stored for months, even in the blazing desert heat. The yakhchal was an ingenious dome-shaped structure, built with heat-resistant materials that kept the interior cool and insulated. These structures had thick walls made of mud bricks, straw, and lime, forming a unique substance known as sarouj, which prevented heat from penetrating inside. Beneath the dome, a deep underground pit was dug to store the ice, keeping it away from the scorching sun. Ice was either harvested from nearby sources during colder months or created using the radiative cooling technique, where shallow water pools were left exposed overnight to freeze. The ice was then transported to the yakhchal, where it remained frozen for extended periods. While the yakhchal was developed in Persia, the Egyptians maintained trade connections with the Persian Empire. This allowed the Egyptian architects and engineers to learn of this technique through merchants, scholars, and captured knowledge from conflicts. The Egyptians, known for their creativity, didn't just want to copy, so they used similar cooling principles in their own structures, particularly in royal palaces and temple complexes. Temples dedicated to gods such as Amun and Ra, where purity and preservation were crucial, utilized subterranean storage systems influenced by Persian designs. Similarly, royal households used insulated chambers to keep ice available for longer periods, providing relief from the relentless heat. Evaporative cooling using clay pots. Unlike the massive yakhchals, which may have been reserved for the elite, the ancient Egyptians had a more practical and widely used method to keep water cool. Evaporative cooling with clay pots. Egyptian artisans crafted porous clay vessels known as zia or karas, specifically designed to keep liquids cool. These unglazed pots allowed water to slowly seep through the walls, where it evaporated upon contact with the hot, dry air. This evaporation drew heat away from the remaining water inside, significantly lowering its temperature. To enhance this effect, Egyptians often stored the pots in shaded, well-ventilated areas, such as stone shelves in homes, temple corridors, or palace courtyards. Some pots were even wrapped in wet cloth, further improving the cooling process. Wealthier Egyptians kept their clay pots in underground storage spaces or near wind catchers, malkaf, architectural elements that channeled cool air into buildings. Evaporative cooling provided a practical and accessible way for any Egyptians to enjoy cold water and preserve perishable liquids. While ice was a luxury for the elite, clay pot cooling was common across all levels of society. Farmers, traders, and temple workers relied on these pots to stay hydrated, and merchants used them to store milk, wine, and medicinal brews. Egyptian physicians also used cool water-soaked cloths to reduce fevers and treat heat exhaustion, providing one of the earliest forms of temperature regulation in medicine. This ancient evaporative cooling method is still widely used in hot, arid regions today. In parts of North Africa, India, and the Middle East, clay pot coolers, known as matkas or zia pots, function on the same principles, providing natural refrigeration without electricity. Even today, scientists are exploring clay-based cooling technologies for sustainable refrigeration solutions, proving that the Egyptian simple yet effective method remains valuable even in the 21st century. Community ice storage. In a civilization as vast as Egypt, where the desert dictated life, preserving ice was a challenge that may not have been left solely to the elite. While pharaohs and high priests had their private cooling chambers and underground storage, there is reason to speculate that community-based ice storage may have existed, ensuring that essential cooling resources were managed collectively in temple complexes, merchant districts, or shared storage facilities. In many ancient societies, including Persia, Greece, and even pre-industrial Europe, communal ice storage was common. The Egyptian used similar methods to store ice that was harvested at night, transported from distant regions, or preserved through evaporative cooling techniques. In major cities such as Thebes or Memphis, public granaries and storage buildings existed for food and other perishable goods. These structures may have included designated areas for ice storage, where collected ice was kept in insulated underground chambers, wrapped in straw or sawdust to prevent melting. Temples, which were centers of not just religion, but also economic and logistical operations, played a role in overseeing and managing ice supplies. Priests directed workers to collect, store, and distribute ice, ensuring that royalty, religious rituals, and medical needs were always met. Even in rural areas, there were collective storage pits lined with insulating materials, ensuring that wealthier farmers or traders could keep perishables cool for extended periods. Communal ice storage became a revolutionary step in Egypt's ability to preserve perishable goods, maintain public health, and enhance religious practices. For religious institutions, stored ice was used in purification rituals, keeping sacred offerings cool and fresh for temple ceremonies. For medical practitioners, having consistent access to stored ice helped in treating heat-related illnesses, reducing fevers, and preserving medicinal herbs. For traders and merchants, cool storage spaces allowed perishable goods like wine, dairy, and fresh produce to last longer, increasing trade efficiency. By managing ice collectively, Egyptian society expanded its access to cooling resources, ensuring that even those outside the palace walls benefited from temperature-controlled storage. The idea of shared cooling storage remains an important part of modern refrigeration logistics.